Bienvenidos, Ushamdid, and welcome to this Hut 8 networking tutorial on the FortiGate Firewall. In this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the local in policy functionality on the FortiGate Firewall. I've recently been working with a wicked smart coworker, Chris, and we had the task of denying administrative access to the firewall from some specific hosts as well as some specific subnets. And so I'm going to walk you through the ins and outs of the local in policy. We're going to look at what you can do from the CLI, what you can do from the GUI, and what you can't do from the CLI and the GUI. I've been gone for a while. I took the summer off, did some traveling, so I am now back and ramping up here for the fall. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at the FortiGate Firewall local in policy. And we're going to be doing this on a FortiGate 60E firewall running 7.0.6 code that has just recently been factory reset. So let's go ahead and dive in and see what we've got. All right, so here we are on the console port with the FortiGate 60E. Again, I'm running code version 7.0.6 for everything that you see here. So if you're running 7.2 or maybe a 6.x branch of the FortiGate code, your mileage may vary here. So again, we just did the factory reset. Let's go ahead and log in. So I'm going to type in admin. There is no default password initially. So you can just hit enter, and that's where you're going to get prompted to enter the new password in. So I'll just say ABCD1234, and then we'll go ahead and re-enter that. So here we are on the FortiGate Firewall. Now, how do we get to it through the GUI? Well, again, you're going to say diag IP address, and this is one way to get it. You can say diag IP address list, right? And that's going to show me a bunch of IP address information. And as we can see, we're really interested here in the internal interface for this device, and that IP is 192.168.1.99. Now, I've had a 300C FortiGate firewall, and the management IP was exactly the same. Now, another way you might be able to see this information or information similar to this is to go ahead and say show system interface. That's another way to get it, right? And there's our system interface information. Now, what's interesting about this and what's going to come back up in this video is this set allow access, right? So that's going to be important to remember that we're seeing that under the interfaces, we've got access that's being allowed to specific interfaces. And here's all these internal interfaces. And if we go ahead and continue down, you can see the internal interface for the virtual domain root. Again, this is you can think of it from, if you're coming from the Cisco world like I am, I like to think of this as sort of like a VRF or a VRF. It's sort of like a hermetically sealed little bubble in which we're doing a bunch of firewall stuff, and we can spin up multiple virtual domains. Again, by default, we have a single virtual domain, the root VDOM, and our internal interface. And again, your model of firewall, if it's different than this may vary, but on the 60E, it's going to be the internal interface, and that's the management IP. And again, you see we've got this set allow access, and so this is going to be important. So let's jump over to the GUI and see what we're working with here. So here we are in the GUI, 192.168.1.99. We've got HTTPS, and we're going to get this warning here because of the certificate. We're going to go to advanced, and I'm going to say accept the risk and continue. And it's here that we're going to receive the login prompt. So admin ABCD1234, and let's get logged in. So the local in policy, I want you to think about the local in policy as an ACL possibly controlling your control, or I should say your management plane traffic, right? And what is the management plane? Let's define that. Well, if you're trying to SSH to the FortiGate device, if you're trying to manage the FortiGate device like I am right here via HTTPS, right? That would be the management plane, and that's what the local in policy is all about. So you might be wondering, well, where do I see that here? Well, it's a policy, so let's click here on policies. Well, we see the firewall policy. Again, default firewall, we don't have much here. We're going to see the implicit deny at the very end, and we've got sort of this all rule here followed by the implicit deny. But we don't see the local in policy. So how do we get that? Well, we're going to come down here to System, and we're going to go to Feature Visibility. Now, this is going to be listed as an additional feature, and you're going to come right down here where you can see Local In Policy. And again, the use case that we're looking at here is I want to deny or control who is gaining administrative access and via which protocols they're gaining administrative access. So let's go ahead and click Local Policy or Local In Policy. And so I just click the little radio button here, made it green, and I'm going to click Apply. Now keep your eyes peeled because it's going to be right here under Policy and Objects where we're going to see the Local In Policy. And there it is. So it wasn't there before. We made it visible. It's here now. So let's click on this and take a look. And as you can see, there's a pretty robust default local in policy. Now, you'll notice that the DMZ has HTTPS administrative connectivity through to the FortiGate Firewall. It's got ping connectivity. And the DMZ also has some other connectivity down here for this custom application on UDP ports 5246 to 5249, right? And some other DMZ entries that are down here. Now, you may not want that, right? So how do we fix that? Well, this was the confusion that I kind of ran into in the GUI was I was like, okay, well, let me see if I can just, double click, or can I, right click, or if I come up here, and it's interesting, this little configure table, it's hidden. So when I mouse over it, that's how you get it to show up. If you don't mouse over it, it's not there. So I moused over this, I went ahead and clicked it. I'm like, okay, well, reset table, what do we do here? It doesn't look like I can do much of anything. And you really can't. And that's the idea. In the local policy view that you're looking at right here in the GUI, you cannot change anything. You cannot make any changes here. And that kind of blew me away. I thought this would be where I would come. I mean, if I want to change the local in policy, why would I not come to the local in policy GUI page to make those changes? So you're probably asking, okay, well, where do we make those changes? So there's two places you can make these changes. You can make them from the CLI, or you can make them in the GUI. However, it's going to be under the interface. And again, this was kind of confusing for me because I'm like, well, wait a second, why can't I just make the changes here? So let's go under the Network tab. Let's click on Interfaces. And here is where you can see administrative access is being defined for the internal interface, for FortiLink, and for the DMZ. So let's go ahead and double click in here. And after I double click, it's here where we can then manipulate the administrative access. So think of it like this. If you're coming from the Cisco world, we would create an ACL, and maybe you apply that ACL to a line, like the VTY lines or the console line. And it's kind of very similar, except FortiGate looks at it from an interface perspective. And so you can see we've got HTTPS and we've got ping. Well, let's go ahead and remove HTTPS. So I'm just going to simply uncheck that. We're going to click OK. And we can confirm, yep, the DMZ, physical interface, that's the IP, and HTTPS has been removed. So now let's go back to the policies and objects, and let's click on our local in policy. And as you can see, administrative access for HTTPS is now only configured for the internal interface. And that's the interface on which I'm accessing it from my iMac right here. And we're going to remove this access here in a second because, as I've just pointed out, yes, we can go ahead and go to the interface and remove the default local in policy settings. But what if I wanted to do something custom? What if I wanted to remove HTTP access from this workstation or from an entire subnet? How would we do that? Well, one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to click on addresses, and I'm going to create a new object here. And this is what you would want to do, because when we go to the CLI and we go to start making changes there, we're going to want to have this address object. So I'm going to create new address, and I'm just going to call this net_192.168.1.0 underscore cider underscore 24. And again, your naming convention may vary. Maybe you want to do underscores in the IP address. This is just something that we're going to be able to easily identify this address object with. Now, what type is it? Is it a subnet? IP range, what's the case? So we're going to go ahead and do a subnet, and I'm going to cut off the entire 192.168.1.0, and you could do the 255.255.255.24 and set that up. However, it does respect the CIDR notation and will intelligently translate that out to the dotted decimal subnet mask notation. Now, no static route configuration here. I'm going to put a comment in here. Maybe it's, we're working on change control request number 8675309. And we've got our new address object that's going to represent that subnet that we currently sit on. And you can see right there, it gives us our /24. If I double click on it, you can see that it did do that translation here, right? And then it comes out, it's going to show us that, hey, that's a /24. All right, so we've got the address object. We've got everything we need. Now let's jump onto the CLI. So there's two ways I can do that. I could go ahead and click on the little CLI tool right here, but we're going to be bouncing back into this area to take a look at some things. So let's go back to local policy in. Again, you cannot manipulate the local in policy. You cannot manipulate that here on this page in the GUI. We would have to go to the interfaces. And again, I'm talking about administrative access. So we can also do it from the CLI. So we're going to jump out here, and the login timeout right now is set to 5 minutes. In fact, let me go ahead and take care of that under System, and let's go to Administrators, and I believe, Settings, and this is where we're going to see that timeout value. If I'm not mistaken, there it is, and I'm going to go ahead and set it to 480 minutes so that we don't get timed out. So then let's go back to our policies and objects, local in policy, and again, we're going to pull HTTP access from any internal box in the 192.168.1, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So let's jump onto the CLI. Let's get logged back in, ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4. So how would we see the local in policy? And this is where Chris and we were saying show firewall local in policy, and we were expecting to see all of those policies that we saw in the GUI. And so you'll notice that all of those policies that are in the GUI do not show up here from the CLI. And we can argue about whether this is a feature or a bug. However, this is the expected, what's the word I'm looking for? Not activity, but behavior. So this is the expected behavior. You're not going to see all of these policies that are defined here. They do not show up here on the CLI. And the same is true for any custom local in policies that you create. You will see them in the CLI, but you will not see them over here in the GUI. Again, for better or for worse, that is how FortiGate handles this local in policy configuration that we're going to be doing. All right, so first things first, we want to cut off HTTP access. So what might that look like? So let's go ahead and get into config firewall local in policy. Now you'll notice if I come out here and do a question mark, we have enter, that's it. So I'm going to hit enter. If I type show from this level of the configuration syntax in the CLI, we don't see anything because there isn't anything. So let's go ahead and do an edit. Now, if we had something in here, I would recommend edit 0. And what edit 0 does is that simply takes a look at what does exist in this custom local in policy that we're going to be working with, and it just places it at the end. So if I had, let's say we had edit 1, edit 2, and I use edit 0, it would place whatever we're going to do here at edit 3. So again, it just puts it at the end of the line. So I'm going to say edit 0, and you can see entry added. So now we've got all kinds of different things that we can set, right? So what might that look at? We could, again, if it existed and we're going into an existing policy, we could use set or unset to change things. But here what we're going to do is we're simply going to go ahead and create a policy that allows us to manipulate things. So let's go ahead and say, let's go ahead and say set, and let's set the interface. We'll set the interface first, and that's going to be internal, right? Because we're using the internal interface. And here's where that object we created is going to come in handy. So I'm going to say set source address. And you'll notice there's some asterisks next to some of those settings, meaning those are mandatory settings here, right? So we have to set these things in order for this local in policy to function. So if I say set source address, now what are we talking about here? Let's go ahead and put a question mark, and you can see we've got some choices. Now I could select all, but that is not what we want to do, right? Because maybe there's another subnet from which we do want to be able to access this firewall via HTTPS. So there is the object we created. Again, that's where this is going to come in handy. And I'm going to show you another little trick here on the FortiGate. If you hit tab, it's going to walk me through everything you see up there. All of those options are being walked through from top to bottom. So if I just tab a few more times, boom, I find my source address. And there we go, right? So now what about service? So let's set the service here. And again, if I didn't want to go through all of this and try to find what I was looking for, I could start hitting tab, right? And we're lucky HTTPS is right up there at the top, right? So I showed you an option where, okay, you got a few address objects. So that's probably, we'll hit tab and we'll get to where we want to go. However, here on the services, there's quite a few services. So if the service you were trying to get to was radius, you're probably not going to sit there and hit tab. You're going to type in radius, right? Or we could have typed in R and hit tab, and that would have gotten us to where we wanted to go, right? Or you would type in radius. But we're talking about HTTPS, and we see it's right at the top, so we can do that. So we're going to say set service HTTPS. Let's do a question mark again and see from the set level. So we've got our interface, we've got our source address, we've got the destination address. Or I'm sorry, I don't think we've done the destination address. And let's do a show right here. So if we type show, we can actually see what we've got here. So let's go ahead and set the destination address. And if I do a question mark, you can see, so where is it? What is the destination address? We've got fabric, etc. So I thought I set internal. Did I not set that? I maybe set internal. I thought maybe I did. So the destination address is just going to be that internal interface. And so this actually, okay, so it does show up. Good, good, good. All right, so there we go. Now, you might have seen set action, right? And if I tab through, we've got two actions here. And this is very Cisco-esque. So if I say set accept and I type enter and say show, you can see, oh, okay, set action, he wants to accept that, but we want to deny that traffic. So what are we going to do here? Well, I'm going to say set action deny, and I'm going to hit enter. So when I say show, it doesn't show up. Again, this is very Cisco-esque. That is the default. So if you don't type anything in there for set action, by default, this local in policy will be dropping the traffic that is being matched, right? And so that's what would end up happening here. Now, let's go back over to the GUI and see, is this having the desired effect? So how would we do that? Well, let's see. I'm doing HTTPS from 192.168.1.99, but it doesn't seem to be working, right? Because I can check my logs. We'll go here to the events. And this is something else that's a little bit different with the FortiGate than with a Cisco device. And that is, on a Cisco device, we type in our commands, and you might think of it like an ACL, right? So let's think of it like that. We've created the ACL, but on the Cisco device, if you create the ACL, okay, great, right? So maybe you created an extended ACL, a standard ACL, doesn't matter. We have to apply that ACL. And the same is true here on the FortiGate. I have to type in end. So let's hit enter. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot my schedule attribute. So let's go back into config firewall, local in policy, and let's hit enter. If I type show, we don't have anything. So we're going to go ahead and short circuit this here, and I'm just going to grab what we do have. We'll do Control-C, Control-V, and it looks like... I grabbed the UID by mistake there. We didn't want that, but we get everything else. And then let's set, and I forgot to set the schedule, and we want the schedule to be always, right? So apologies there. So now when I say show, you can see interface internal. We've got the source address where traffic's going to be coming from. We've got our destination. We've got the service, and then we've got the schedule. So now when I type in and we say show firewall local in policy here from the CLI, we see it. There it is. Again, the custom local in policy we see. We come back over here and now things are going to be a little bit different. Let's go ahead and refresh this, right? And you'll notice that up here you can see it's kind of thinking, okay, well, hey, I'm trying to reload that page. What if I go to logs and events? What do we see? That's cached. If I click on system events, what are we seeing? We're not seeing anything. And so let's even do this. Let's log out, right? The ultimate test. I'm going to log out and you can see it says attempting to reconnect. So if I was logged in, it's simply going to deny me. Again, so the use case is maybe you had a user that was already logged into the GUI from a subnet they're not supposed to be. If they were, they're going to see nothing, right? I mean, they're going to see the menu and things, but they're not going to see any of the information, any of the config information through the GUI. If you had a user that wasn't logged in altogether, again, let's kill that tab, kick open a new tab, and let's type in here https://192.168.1.99, and let's hit enter. Nothing is going to happen, right? Nothing's going to happen here. So we've achieved our goal, and that's why I cut off only the HTTPS access so that we can still get to it through the CLI, right? And again, I'm actually on the console line here, so I'm not coming in via SSH. We could have killed SSH as well. I just didn't. So here we are taking a look at this, and let's take a look at something else that's interesting, right? If I was to go ahead and say show system interface again, and we come down to the DMZ, you can see that that HTTP access does not show from here anymore. So let's do one more change from here before we go back in. We're going to remove that local in policy. But before we do that, let's go ahead and say config system interface. And we're going to edit that DMZ interface. And I'm simply going to say, if we take a look at the options here, I can say unset allow access. And I believe that is going to achieve what we want. And there we go. We're in the DMZ interface. And I've just removed any access from the DMZ interface. Now, we're going to say end, and then let's go ahead and let's configure. Let me go ahead and say config firewall local in policy. Now, if I was to step back, actually, if I was to say, let's go ahead and say end. If I said config firewall and actually just go up arrow and then did a question mark, you can see it shows enter. So we hit enter and then we question mark here. We can edit, delete, purge. Well, let me go ahead and say delete. And if I hit tab, look what happens. It shows me the one local in policy that's there. Or I could throw a question mark up here and it's going to show you, hey, these are the local in policies you have. So if it was edit 1, edit 2, edit 3, edit 4, we'd see that. So I'm just going to say delete 1. Now, remember, I'm in the local in policy. I haven't saved anything. Let's try again here. What happens? Well, it comes back and we get logged in, right? So when we delete that policy out, I say in. So if I was to say show firewall local in policy, what do we see? We see that that custom policy is gone. We're now back in the interface. Let's come up here to policies and objects, local in policy, and you can also see DMZ has been removed universally, right? All right, so that is going to do it for this tutorial on the FortiGate Firewall and the local in policy. Again, remember some of the key takeaways here. We can't edit the default local in policy from this screen. You've got to go under the interfaces in order to make that happen for administrative access. We can create custom policies. We created a custom object. I went ahead and then blocked connectivity from that entire subnet, the 192.168.1. No administrative access was allowed from that subnet with that custom rule. And we can manipulate this screen here from the CLI as well. So again, the custom object that we created doesn't show up here, right? So remember that. On the CLI, when we create a custom local in policy, it's not going to show up here. We'd have to see that from the CLI. All right, well, hopefully this is going to help you out. It's good to be back. You're going to be seeing a lot more content from me coming up, especially on the FortiGate Firewall, and we're going to be diving back into some Cisco Python programmability. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and as I always say, I hope to see you in the next video.